Regina, Mater misericordiae, vita dulcedo, estes nostra salve.
The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Luke. One day, as Jesus was teaching, the Pharisees and teachers of the law, who had come from every village of Galilee and Judea and Jerusalem, were sitting there, and the power of the Lord was with him for healing. Some men brought on a stretcher a man who was paralyzed. They were trying to bring him in and set him in his presence, but not finding a way to bring him in because of the crowd, they went up on the roof and lowered him on the stretcher through the tiles into the middle in front of Jesus. When Jesus saw their faith, he said, "As for you, your sins are forgiven." Then the scribes and the Pharisees began to ask themselves, "Who is this who speaks blasphemies? Who but God alone can forgive sins?" Jesus knew their thoughts and said to them in reply, "What are you thinking in your hearts? Which is easier to say, 'Your sins are forgiven,' or to say, 'Rise and walk'? But that you may know that the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins." He said to the one who was paralyzed, "I say to you, rise, pick up your stretcher, and go home." He stood up immediately before them, picked up what he had been lying on, and went home glorifying God. Then astonishment seized them all, and they glorified God, and struck with awe, they said, "We have seen incredible things today." The Gospel of the Lord. Today is the feast of St. Damasus. Perhaps not as well known a figure in the church among popes, but yet vital because he's so far back and away. Did a lot of research and fact-checking concerning the early martyrs, and because of him, we have a chronology of many of the early martyrs of the church. Also, he instituted Latin as the liturgical language of the church, and he commissioned Saint Jerome to translate the scriptures into Latin, which would become the Vulgate. And this is all in the 4th century, by the way. It's that far back. One of the things that I like to say to my Protestant friends who think that Catholics are probably not the best of Christians, I tell them you should thank God for us because we gave you the Bible. My second homily is two things here to notice in this gospel passage. First of all, the power of intercessory prayer. The faith of 4 friends of this paralyzed man is what impresses Jesus. Not the paralyzed man, but the faith of his friends who interceded to get Jesus involved in this. It shows us the power of intercessory prayer and how effective it can be. And you could say the route that they had to travel to get him in front of Jesus shows you that sometimes intercessory prayer is not always a direct route, and sometimes it doesn't go the way you want, but you keep praying, and the end result becomes reality. The second thing we see in this passage is the connection between healing and the forgiveness of sins. The two are not always related, but in this case they are. I heard the testimony of a psychologist and an exorcist tell me that they would both be unemployed if people made use of the sacrament of reconciliation, a healing sacrament of the church. If people made better use of the sacrament of reconciliation and living a sacramental life. Can you imagine that? And so you want to talk about healing and you want to talk about preventive medicine. Look at what you have in your faith. We have 2 sacraments of healing, and it shows you the medicinal purposes that are involved, not only for reconciling the human person with God, but for reconciling your body with the glory of God. The Eucharist is also a huge medicinal sacrament, isn't it? We say, Lord, I'm not worthy to receive you. I'm not worthy that you should come under my roof. Say but the word, and my soul shall be healed. Every Mass is a prayer for healing. And I have seen people during my priesthood healed literally by receiving the Eucharist. Not things to be taken lightly or giggled about, and yet things to be taken very seriously as the treasures of our church that are offered to us for the glory of God and the restoration of our body and soul.
Regina Celi, laetare, alleluia, qui